Please welcome our illustrious past presidents. And just a note about Monsignor Brian Hare. He was scheduled to be with us, and I spoke to him on Saturday. He has a medical procedure next week, and his physicians advised him not to travel. So I assured him that 550 of us would be holding him in prayer for a successful medical procedure and quick recovery. Okay, so now we get a chance to hear from all of you. My first question for all three of you, since you've arrived, you've encountered old friends, and I'm sure many memories have been elicited. What do you miss most about your time at Catholic Charities USA?
Well, I can tell you that what I miss most is all of you. And all of you, because you represent the living church. This is not a stagnant, boring church. This is alive with the love of God and the absolute commitment to the mission of the gospel. And so what I miss is the chance to continue to rub shoulders with the likes of you and all the wonderful people that you serve out in the field. That's a huge, for me personally, a huge loss. So I just share that with you.
So this is probably going to sound like a broken record, but just arriving and seeing folks from the national office that I hadn't seen for quite a while, and now with seeing the directors and staff, it's definitely the people, because Catholic Charities is certainly an organization, but it's like a big family. And for 10 years, you were my family, and that continues. Those relationships continue on. So definitely, I would agree with Sister Donna.
I'd probably say the same thing, but the people contact that's most important is traveling the country and seeing the works in the agencies. That's the thing I probably miss the most.
Well, this morning I spoke about a number of challenges over our 115 years, and that's kind of in our DNA to respond to societal challenges. So I'd like to get your thoughts on some particularly challenging moments that each of you faced in your tenure. Sister Donna, your time as CEO saw an unprecedented moment in the history of our network and truly in world history with the onset of COVID-19. The pandemic disrupted everyone's lives, but those already living in poverty were particularly vulnerable. So many people in this room were part of Catholic Charities' monumental response. As you look back 5 years later, what were the most important decisions you and our network made during that time?
Well, those years around 2019 to 2022 or so were really filled with tragedy of all sorts. And then, we had the border crisis with the caravans coming. We had COVID on top of it. We had no way to fight COVID because we didn't have any vaccines or any kind of PPE at the time. And at the same time, people were losing their jobs and people were left homeless. And so then, as a CEO you worry about everybody. And I was worried sick about all of our people in the field, all of the people who were sick on the streets, and trying to figure out how on earth we were going to get through this. My fear was that we would see people dying in our own network, and some did. So I think that experience really jolted us at the national office to say, okay, we've got to really be resilient. We've got to get our act together, figure out how we're going to get PPE to the frontline people. How are we going to deal with the homelessness issue? And how can we give some relief to our workers? So one of the things that I think I'm most proud of is what the national staff did to try to get all kinds of people across the country to start making masks and start dealing with getting protection for our people on the front lines. And then, as you know, when the vaccine came out, it was only given to those who were 75 and older. And so then I thought, well, okay, we've still got tens of thousands of Catholic Charities folks on the streets working without any kind of protection. So I decided to call the Leadership Conference of Women Religious and said, what do you think about asking if there would be senior sisters, 75 and older, who were vaccinated, who would come down to come out and serve in our agencies who needed help. And so we had 300 women religious come, all seniors over 75. I couldn't go because at that time I wasn't old enough. But for me, that was like a sense of, all right, we're in trouble. And who do you call on? You call on people of like mind who value the same sorts of things to step up to the plate and do whatever they can. And so between the folks in Alexandria and the sisters coming to help us till the rest of us could get vaccinated, we began to feel a little bit of hope that somehow we were going to get through this, at the same time trying to develop housing and provide food and safety for people. So that to me was a huge challenge, but it was all of us coming together and knowing that you have to dream wildly in a crisis time. So then I say to people, yeah, we got 300 nuns who went to the agencies, and my colleagues at Leadership 18 were like, you did what? I said, yeah, we needed help, and they were vaccinated. So it's like, you've got to think out of the box in a crisis time, and that's what happened.
Brilliant. Father Larry, this August was the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. You led a national response on the part of the Catholic Charities Network in the wake of that devastating storm, ultimately distributing more than $160 million in disaster relief funds. What did you learn from both the devastation of Hurricane Katrina and from the response of the Catholic Charities Network?
Well, first of all, when we were confronted with Hurricane Katrina, at that point, there was unparalleled destruction that it had caused, both with the hurricane itself, but also with the failure of the levees, so that the lower Ninth Ward getting flooded and all that. It was epic proportions, and so at that time, it was just a few weeks before our annual gathering was supposed to happen, I believe, in Phoenix that year. And so I got a few calls from diocesan directors saying, we have people suffering in the Gulf Coast. We can't come together and just party and celebrate, which is not what we do here anyway, right? We're serious. But I went and spent a couple weeks in Baton Rouge with the staff of Baton Rouge, but also the staff of Catholic Charities New Orleans had relocated there. And I asked them, what do you need from us? And they said, by all means, you should meet. We need to know that you were there. Life is going on within the network. And it was a great thing because we were able to videotape each of those leaders who gave a message to the annual gathering, which I don't think there was a dry eye in the house when that happened. But what it had an effect of really motivating our membership and saying, we have to do something because we are connected to these people. And up until that time, the Office of Disaster Response basically gave out grants. If something happened in your diocese, we would send you a grant. And people were saying, like, that's not good enough anymore because we need to bring our resources, we need to bring ourselves. And so we took that very seriously and started developing an expanded Office for Disaster Response. And one of the first things we did was hire someone who could do that. And I think Kim Burgo is here. Good. I stole Kim Burgo from Catholic Relief Services, but it's been great because Kim has, in fact, made our network into one of the premier disaster response organizations that is ready. I mean, she's still doing academies to help our agencies prepare. But when something does happen, it's still a local response, but you have the resources of not only the national office, but also all the member agencies. So that has been a very positive thing that happened from Katrina. One other thing that in how Katrina impacted us, I think, was that it showed up the incredible disparities of how that storm affected people. And who were those most adversely affected? Poor and people of color. And so we said that has to impact our message going forward. And it did. So the next year we did a policy paper on poverty in America, the following year on racism in America. And those two things really helped focus us, even in our strategic planning going forward. And it was that experience of Katrina that really impacted all of us. It's showing those inadequacies in how we were responding. And I think today we do it much better because of what we learned.
Stunning. Father Fred, you might also want to comment on Katrina because you were the provincial and were living in New Orleans at the time. But I also want to ask you about your tenure at CCUSA in the mid-1990s, when there was a very public and contentious debate in Washington and around the country about how a society should best care for those living in poverty, resulting in the Welfare Reform Act in 1996, which you strenuously opposed. As you look back on that time, what lessons stand out that you think could benefit us today and into the future?
Let me take Katrina first. I'll be second to what Larry is saying. The one lesson is the poor are hit the hardest. But the other lesson is that they're affected for the longest time. And even to today, there are parts of New Orleans that have not rebuilt. Because they, in general, just talk about housing, they don't have insurance, they don't have savings, and often people don't have clear title to their homes in poor communities. That houses have been passed down through generations without using expensive lawyers like myself. And so that's just an important lesson for us to keep in mind. To go back to the welfare reform thing, we opposed the original Clinton plan, and then we opposed the House Republican plan of what we used to call the Contract with or On America. But what's important is before the act was passed, 78% of poor families in the United States received some kind of cash assistance, AFDC or ADC, depending on what state you're in. After the Reform Act, that dropped to 23%. But what we predicted and what we argued turned out to be, in fact, be what happened. So one of the lessons is to trust the truth of what you're working on and what you're trying to make happen in terms of something like the welfare reform debate. And you know, at the end, Senator Moynihan said on the floor of the Senate, if people understood what was going on in this country right now, they would be advocates circling the whole Capitol building right now to oppose what this Senate and House are about to do. And they did it. And it affected poor families to this very day because the right that was invested in the act, your right to benefits, even if they were limited by the state you were in, et cetera, that right disappeared. And now it became much more discretionary with the states. And being a Southern, I would say the Southern states are generally appalling in how they respond to the needs of poor families and Black families.
We saw this morning a beautiful video from our upcoming People of Hope initiative, through which we asked Catholic Charities staff and volunteers to describe a particularly memorable moment of service and encounter. What about for each of you? Is there a moment or a particular interaction from your work with Catholic Charities that is particularly meaningful to you?
Well, let me tell you my first encounter in the field, which happened shortly after I was named president of Catholic Charities. And it was before I'd even moved to Alexandria. And it shaped, I would have to say, it shaped the way I walked into this ministry and the way I incorporated that into my spirituality, my prayer, and my behavior. And that was there was a meeting of Caritas North America. From Caritas Internationalis, we were in groups regionally, and it was Mexico, Canada, Mexico, Canada, and the United States, and a few from South America. And we were meeting in San Antonio, and we went to McAllen. So that my first moment of real on the ground being with Catholic Charities people was to go to the detention centers where the children at that time, you remember in 2015, were being held in cages. And we had Sister Norma Pimentel got us into the cages. You know, Norma is not going to give up easy. And so she said, oh, you to the guards, she said, you can't not let these bishops and sisters go in to see the children. So she got us in there. And I think the image of that stuck with me to this day. What are we doing to each other? And I think you see that all the time in your own ministry. The question is there, what are we doing to each other as human beings? So I know that really still hits me. Those images, I just, oh. And I think it shaped my whole way of being in Catholic Charities service. And it was just one of those very formative experiences. And then, you go through year after year of seeing these things. And I know I was changed, and I know you are too. And so that would be something that I just share with you.
I thought this was maybe the most difficult question you were going to ask us, because there's so many experiences that you have from visiting individual agencies, but also representing all of you at the Vatican in Caritas Internationalis, and being able to meet the Pope, but knowing because you stand with us that happened. So a lot of different things, but there's one thing that really made an impression on me in this, and I have to go back to Katrina. When that happened, Pope Benedict asked Cardinal Cortez to come over and be his spokesperson in reaching out to the people who had been affected by that. And they asked our office to, go ahead and plan his visit. And so we did. We went. And at that point, we were still all in Baton Rouge because the city had been evacuated. And we flew over to Biloxi in those huge Marine helicopters, because he was considered a head of state and all that. So it was quite something. But there was one experience where an entire community of Vietnamese immigrants who were shrimpers, when they evacuated, they said, we're going together. And they found a Catholic school that had a gymnasium and a cafeteria, and they all stayed together as a community. And which was kind of amazing, because I think Catholic Charities had, in fact, resettled them. And so we went there, and they knew the Cardinal was coming to give them the message from the Pope. So they were all in the gymnasium seated, and Cardinal Cortez and the other bishops and I walk in, and we go up on the stage, and we're looking at these people who have lost everything. And they all stood up, and they started singing America the Beautiful in Vietnamese. And it was like, we were all like, oh my God, this is just too overwhelming. And it's just one of those experiences that stays with me. I can still see it. But I feel privileged to have had that experience, to see that happen.
There's so many experiences like that. Let me just jump ahead a little bit to a topic from this morning, but also a key moment. All of what I had to deal with in the 90s was hopelessness, which you talked about today, because many charities people knew that the wiping out of AFDC or ADC was going to affect poor families. So I found myself needing to start talking about hope, which I had not paid a lot of attention to. I think maybe I paid more to faith and charity, but not hope. And I was in an agency I think it was in Santa Rosa, but it was one of the smaller dioceses in California. And they used, I keep this in my wallet, just so you know, they used a quote from the Czech poet Václav Havel. And it actually was taken from the Bay Area Rapid Transit, because the piece of paper that I originally have at home says at the bottom, Bay Area Rapid Transit, one of those quotes up in the subway. It's the best piece about hope that I've ever heard, other than Jesus' stories or Isaiah today. And this is, I think, important for us to hear now in the midst of this. 3 little paragraphs on a very little card. Either we have hope within us or we don't. It is a dimension of the soul. And it's not essentially dependent on some particular observation of the world or estimate of the situation. Hope is not prognostication. It is an orientation of the spirit, an orientation of the heart. Hope in this deep and powerful sense is not the same as joy that things are going well, or willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously headed for early success, but rather an ability to work for something because it is good, not just because it stands a chance to succeed. Lastly, hope is definitely not the same thing as optimism. It is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how it turns out. It is this hope above all which gives us the strength to live and continually try new things, even in conditions that seem as hopeless as ours do here and now. Now, when he gave it, I had to go track this quote down. It actually was a speech he gave at Liberty Hall in 1986 in Philadelphia, when his country was still under communism, and he was one of the great anti-communist speakers. And within 3 years of this last sentence, it gives us, even in conditions that seem as hopeless as ours do here and now, communism fell, and he was later elected president of the Czech Republic. But it's the best piece because we invest in what we do because it's good and right, and not necessarily because it has a chance to succeed. And I think it's good wisdom for us even today.
Superb wisdom. I'm going to need a copy of that. It's how it works. Prior to this, we invited the membership to submit questions that they wanted to ask of you. So I have a few that I'd like to ask on their behalf. The first is this, and I started this by confessing that you are my heroes, and I try to emulate your leadership in my own, in your honor, and because of what I have learned from you. The question from the audience is, who is a leader whom you have particularly admired and tried to emulate in your own vocations?
Well, I have to say that I saw that question ahead of time, and I thought, man, I don't know how to answer that, because there have been so many people who've been so influential in my own life. And I thought, well, okay, who really helped me wake up? And I would have to say, I suppose, in terms of the social mission of the church, it would have been Nelson Mandela. And realizing his courage, his ability to stand up in the face of horrific anger against him, trying to deal with apartheid. And so for me, it was a message of courage, of kindness in a real deep way, and the love of the people of South Africa. So that's where my head went. There are so many giants in my life that I'm so grateful for.
Other Larry?
Yeah, I would say there's 2 people that came immediately to mind for me. And one is my predecessor of directed Catholic Charities in the Twin Cities, Monsignor Boxleitner. And if any of you knew him, he is kind of a big, gruff guy. But and he put up with no nonsense, especially from elected officials. He would take them to task on anything. But the thing about it was, throughout all of that, it reminded me like of the Old Testament prophets, right? They're like, they've got that justice behind them. But he was the friend of the poor. He was the person who, no matter what, had their backs. And so that he was a great model for me there. But the other person I would say is Father Brian Hare, because I had gone through seminary, 4 years of theology, but it wasn't until I heard Father Brian Hare give a lecture where he synthesized theology with public policy, or how the church is supposed to act in the public sphere, that it all made sense to me. And so to this day, anytime that I hear Brian speak, I'm always taking notes. And if he were here today, I'd be taking notes as well.
Look, mine goes back actually to my sophomore year in high school. In the history of Catholic social teaching in this country, there are a group of pioneers called the labor priests. They were about 10 or 20 of them, and usually in university centers working with unions and race initiatives. And I had a chance during what was then called the Summer School of Catholic Action in Dallas in 1961 to sit at the feet of a man named Father Lou Toomey. And I went to it was a week-long thing, and you went to different courses. And I went to one course on segregation, and one course on anti-communism, which was the old package, and one course on labor, which really was the introduction to the encyclicals in Catholic social teaching. Lou died as a young man. He smoked, but he set up the Institute of Human Relations at Loyola University in New Orleans, just like many other labor priests had done, and he became a model for me, really, in my life.
Well, we stand on the shoulders of giants.
We do.
That's true. So one more question that was submitted from the members. How do you recommend our agencies and team members act to help heal the social cultural divide in our country? And candidly, do you think there are any ways we may be unknowingly contributing to that divide?
Well, when Pope Francis kept reminding us that the act of encounter is so fundamental to our lives as believers, I'm thinking healing a divide is that we take the courage to speak and engage with the other who thinks differently, maybe absolutely differently from the way I may feel or think, and not to be afraid to engage that person, to find out about them, to learn why they're thinking the way they are, and to be able to do the same thing myself, to open myself to hear and to speak. But sometimes I think we get afraid to cross the street in the parable of the Good Samaritan. But that it's easier to stay in our comfort zones, and that I think has caused us a lot of difficulty. So I think Catholic Charities does provide an opportunity for people to cross over to the other, to learn more about what's happening, to listen, not to tell our own story, and not to become defensive, but to see what truth is in their experience. And that takes effort. I think we would make a mistake if we didn't step out of our comfort zone and we stayed more, just more with the folks that think like we do. So whether that's politically, spiritually, ideologically, it's like to look at the other as a human being who has a perspective that I can learn something from. And that, to me, is the best way we can go about helping to heal. It certainly isn't through arguing, and it's not through trying to prove a point. We're not going to convince anybody. So I think it's through the engagement, the encounter, and the witness that we give through our own lives.
Yeah, I'm kind of at a loss for this one because typically in my life, I've always thought that civil discourse, civil dialogue is the way to bridge misunderstandings. And yet that's exactly what seems to be lacking today, is an openness to having that kind of conversation. But in spite of that, I think we still have to be respectful. We have to listen, and we have to be clear in articulating why we believe what we do. But that means we also then should expect honesty from the other side and to call people on when they're not being honest or they're telling things that aren't true. I mean, throughout history, people have been very creative in how they demonize the poor. In previous centuries, there were the debates about who are the worthy poor, who are the unworthy poor. But even when I first went to Catholic Charities, at that time, the federal government was not using words like poor. They were using economically disadvantaged. They weren't using hunger. They were using nutritionally challenged. And we intentionally said, no, the words poor may make you uncomfortable. The words hungry may make you may make you uncomfortable. But, that's the reality. And so I think my fear is right now is that we need to stand with those who are being demonized, with the poor, with the immigrants, with the LGBT community, and because they don't have many people standing with them right now. And where would Jesus stand? I think so. To me, it's trying to make sure that people are not lost in this thing.
I agree with a lot of what's been said. I think the power of story, the video we watched earlier, the stories that you are going to fill your hearts and minds, we have to keep telling those stories. It's what Larry is saying about standing with the poor and enabling the poor when we can and when they can and when they're willing to do so, to tell their own stories. I'm less concerned about the divide than I am about people being forgotten. So I think other people can work in a big way on the divide. We have to keep telling the stories of the poor.
Right. And that really is one of the most beautiful things about Catholic Charities, is that we are there for those that others have abandoned or forgotten.
And Jesus' genius is telling stories.
Yeah.
All those parables are stories.
Yeah. In the course of this conversation, we have really spanned the past 3 decades, 30 years, reflected by your leadership in momentous points of time in our nation, in our world. As you consider the next 30 years for Catholic Charities, and you do your own thinking around the signs of the times, what do you view as the most exciting opportunity for our network? Who would like to begin with that?
I would just say briefly that I have hope about the next 30 years because there has always been an incredible creativity here in this group. You used the word movement earlier today to define Catholic Charities. So, from the time of Monsignor O'Grady until now, Catholic Charities has been creative about how to face issues that are here. But we've done that because we have a very strong foundation. And that foundation is the gospel. It is Catholic social thought. And, the one thing about us is that our experience is Catholic Charities has always dealt with the messiness of life. It's the part of the church that deals with the messiness of life. And we have been very creative in doing that, especially in our local agencies. And even in the conversation we had this morning, we heard that still happening. That's where my hope for the future comes.
I think one of the things that was hitting me this morning with the museum, the traveling museum, was that one of the beautiful issues that we can, that was already talked about here, was the telling of the story. But so many people don't know what Catholic Charities does still. And I still meet people like that. Well, what do you do? But I think the story is the vehicle, and the times, as technology and social media evolve, there'll be more opportunities for those stories to be told. And it's a way of engaging in public preaching of the gospel through that kind of powerful story that, as Fred said, you got them all in your heart. You know, I mean, you have hundreds of those stories, but they need to be spoken because that's what instills hope in a world is sorely in need of hope. And so I think that to me is a treasure that you have, and everyone in this room has lots of stories.
And I don't know what the challenges of the next 30 years are really going to be, but I would say reach back into the scriptures. Over and over again, I used to say to staffs around the thing, the people you serve today are the same people that the Old Testament called us to protect, the honoring, the least. They were widows, orphans, and strangers. Most of the people you serve are poor women, poor children, and people who are either literally immigrants and refugees or treated differently because they are different in some way. But the scriptures called for the Israelites to, one, care for those people, and two, protect them from oppression and exploitation. And those are what we could talk about, service and advocacy. So while we serve the people in need, we have to continue serving the people in need, et cetera. We have to continue speaking out for the people we serve. And never letting the threats about funding or other things dim our voices. We have to be, well, they said in 1910 they want to be the attorney for the poor. When I started I used to be an attorney for the poor with legal services in Atlanta in the years right after I was ordained. And the man who taught me to do legislative advocacy said, listen, we don't take anybody to lunch. We don't donate to their campaigns. In Georgia, we don't take them fishing or hunting. We don't take them out to dinner and 3 martinis. But what do? We offer them honest, forthright analysis of what they do and how it affects the people we serve. And that has to continue being our role. And we're not afraid to say, well, if you do this, as we said in 1996, if you do this, millions of people are going to lose their income base, and that happened. And we have to keep saying that over and over again to policymakers, speaking, as they say, truth to power.
Your prophetic words, yes. Your prophetic words in this panel and your leadership over all of those years has been an enormous blessing to Catholic Charities USA. We are all the beneficiaries of what you have contributed, how you have led, the insights and the courage and the prophetic voice that you have shared. On behalf of all of us in the Catholic Charities Network, past and present, I want to thank you sincerely and deeply for decades upon decades of dedicated service, inspired leadership, and uncommon compassion and concern for the least among us. Thank you so much for all you've done for Catholic Charities and for the millions of people in need. Please join me in a round of applause for our past presidents.